Hello, hello, and welcome everyone to In Time. My name is Nicholas Lamar Soutter, and with me today is ProLib. ProLib, how are you?
I'm all right. I'm okay.
Oh, yeah, you've been seeing the news. Oh, that always just.
Yeah, that's what I'm looking at right now. It's got me a little down, I'll be honest.
Oh, and we have a guest with us. I'll be bringing him out in a second. Not the promised guest, but still a very good guest, nonetheless. So, but what I'd like to do before we yeah, the PA state rep appears to have calmed down a bit, and we'll we'll look into that in a second. But
Wow.
yeah, there's a few things we're covering. Obviously, COVID-19 is starting to rear its ugly head again. We're not going to really, I think, see it for about another week before we start to see some changes in the numbers again. The numbers have been getting better, better, better. They're going to start getting worse, worse, worse as states have been reopening. It's usually about a 2 week lag time. Um, California, which had been going down since May 5th. On May 5th, they had a record of 2005 cases, new cases in one day, 2005 cases in a 24-hour period, and they've been going, or sorry, 2,603 cases in a 24-hour period. It's been going down since May 5th. It has now broken that May 5th record at 2,617 in the last a 24-hour period. And unfortunately, I mean, it's just the numbers are going to keep going up. That's what you don't get a single outlier in a situation like this. Uh, the Boston Marathon has been canceled. It's the first time in their 124-year history that they've canceled it. I remember there was talks of canceling it the year after the marathon bombing. I
Mm,
live just outside of Boston, so it was a very big deal to us and sort of seared in all of our consciousnesses. And but we
sure.
we still did it, and they are now canceling it, which is the right call, I think. But and then let's see, the protests in Minneapolis, Minnesota, which went from protests to rioting and looting. We're starting sort of what would ostensibly be the third day of that, and we're going to sort of try to keep an eye on that. But they have spread also to Memphis, Tennessee, Los Angeles, California, and New York, New York, which have all started with what appears to be demonstrations and has now turned into rioting and or looting. And finally, Donald Trump has signed an executive order, which appears to be aimed at extracting some kind of vengeance for his humiliation at Twitter. But he's targeting all social networks from Twitter to Facebook and requiring that if they edit content in any way, if they filter content in any way, that they be responsible for editing or filtering all their content, which is a absurdly high bar. This is an executive order that he has issued to the FCC and asked them to begin to enforce those kinds of legislations based on an interpretation of an older article on, I think it was defamation and slander, but or no, what is it? I don't know. We'll get into it. But so what I'd like to do, you can't see him yet. We'll see him in a minute. But I'd also like to introduce our guest for tonight, Saka Count. Saka, how are you? Uh,
Pretty good. How you doing? Can you guys hear me?
yep. We're good. We can hear you. So perfect. So let's see. We've got riots, we've got the social media, and we've got the increase in COVID cases. Ethan, where do you want to start?
Huh. Um, this is, by the way, it's an election year. So, like, all
Yeah.
I can think about is how on Earth 2, where COVID didn't happen, Earth 12, whatever, right now we're talking about, the Trump versus the Biden ads and whatnot. Um, this is I 2020 could not be the only way it could get more crazy if like aliens show up at this point. Like what I don't it's just nuts. Everything is crazy. I honestly I think these riots are going to continue to spread from city to city. People are home or they're unemployed. They're angry. They've been angry for a long time, legitimately so. And this is, I think, the beginning. And I don't know what the end is, but this also helps. Remember that the foreign powers who want to who want to hurt us want nothing more than for us to be at each other's throats. They need the United States to be fighting with each other because they can't take us down on their own. They need us to take out each other on the inside. So they're going to do everything they can to influence these protests, to influence these demonstrations, and I think they're going to be successful. We have 40 million unemployed people in the United States. They don't have anything else to do all day. And people are going to go to these protests, and they are going, I think, to get much worse.
I think that's a great, and I do want to get Soutter to weigh in on it, but I do think that that's a great observation that I hadn't thought of, which is in particular the interference, the Russian interference in our elections, which remember, they really did appear from everything I've seen, they wanted Trump to win, but they were also definitely doing things that were helping the Hillary campaign because what they wanted was the fighting. They wanted the polarization. So they were engaging in disinformation against Trump as well as for him. They clearly seemed to have a bias strongly towards him, but they weren't just tanking Hillary. They were tanking him as well because they wanted to feed trolls and fighting on both sides. And I am concerned. I really do think that this looks like this is the starting of something that may get much larger. I mean, this is spreading across cities. New York was going to be an obvious one. There's been a lot of tensions between police officers and New Yorkers for some time, but there are also even some southern states. Texas has had some issues with police officers. Los Angeles was a big one, but there are other communities in California that have similar issues, and I am concerned that this is going to grow into a big thing. This isn't yet the LA riots, but the LA riots were also confined to LA. This
right.
Yeah.
Imagine the LA riots, but everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and not to, the other thing is, this is going to sound really stupid. I said this earlier when I forget what was the when the dam broke, 3 dams in Michigan broke, and everybody had to go to shelters to evacuate. One of the things we mentioned was, and it turns out they did have a good deal of protection in place at those shelters, but nobody's going to be social distancing in the same way that they would otherwise. So you're going to see a huge spike in COVID-19 numbers. Now, nobody should worry about that. You need to do what you have to do to stay safe, and that includes getting to a shelter. But we are going to see a spike in COVID cases because of people being in those shelters, and I think we're going to see a spike as a result of the rioting too. So this is it seems to be a bit of a vicious cycle, and it's a little concerning. To
say the least.
So, Saka, what are your thoughts?
There we go. Sorry about that.
He's in Afghanistan,
storm.
folks. He is our correspondent in Afghanistan. So there's a lag as the signal has to bounce from satellites to Afghanistan and back. But he is that important that we brought him in from Afghanistan. So please continue.
The attitude on the streets of Kabul right now is that.
And his PhD is in BS, and he is boy, is he good at it. So you were saying a perfect storm?
No, it's just a perfect storm of circumstances to bring this on. Like you said, the self-quarantine, the tanking economy, being stuck in COVID, inside because of COVID, and just the increased tensions from that, is that there's a certain amount of tension that's already on people just because of this the huge changes in lifestyles that they're already seeing, and it's not a surprise that something like this is going to happen. It's a catalyst that has taken all these situations right now and has literally just broken the tension. The racial tensions have always been high, and as unfortunate as it is, the idea of racial tensions between police officers and African Americans in the States. This is just the one that, combined with everything else, has the straw, the metaphorical straw that broke the camel's back, and it's not going to get better. Things are just spiraling out of control everywhere because of all these other factors as well, and there's really like at this point, like I watched some of the looting videos earlier, and now it's less about it doesn't seem to be as focused much on the protesting aspect of it as just people that are just lashing out now, and because of that, it gives them that excuse to do so. And like I said, it's just probably just going to get worse.
Yep, I agree. I think people aren't, this isn't something that's new, right? We've been seeing police over policing minority neighborhoods and minority populations for a long time in the United States. And now you've got this perfect storm where, this man was just murdered. The cop just kept his knee on his neck for some reason and throat until he died. He was murdered, in my opinion. And the authorities aren't doing anything about it. Just before we came in the air, I saw I think it was the chief of the police or the DA there that says, "Oh, well, there's other evidence that you haven't seen that exonerates not exonerates, but that lends credence to the fact that this cop, right, it's exculpatory in some way." That says, this cop didn't commit murder. And I'm telling you, that statement alone is going to be an absolute firestorm. And I don't think that these cops are going to be prosecuted for murder. I think that they'll say, well, we fired them and that's enough. And it's not enough. And it hasn't been enough. And it continues to not be enough. And people aren't working. And they're already terrified of the virus and the lack of conviction on part of the cops is going to turn into conviction on the part of the protesters. And this is going to get worse.
Well, and to quickly just clarify, you painted a slightly rosier picture. He at a minimum lost consciousness, if not died, after 8 minutes of the police officer with his knee on the throat. And the officer stuck with his knee there for another 11 minutes on top of that after he was already not responsive. At what point he died, I don't know. But it seems to me that if he's unresponsive, you don't have to keep your knee on his throat. And it's in violation of their policies for arresting people. But that's, until he died would have been charitable. That certainly does not appear to be what happened. And the video that I've since seen the video. There's actually multiple video.
And they don't.
Please. Yeah, Saka. We're please.
Afghanistan is very far away.
And and they don't do themselves any favors too. Like there's bad choices that are just being made in general. Yeah. Like the fact that now that this cop has gone out and has hired the same lawyer who had gotten the other officer off for the Philandro Castile shooting, I believe, which was also in Minnesota a few years back. He went off and got the same lawyer as that, which even just that act alone, they'll just constantly just like, hey, what can we do to make the situation worse? Hold my beer.
Sure. Well, and to us, it looks like, what can you do to make the situation worse? For them, it's, well, what can we do to make sure that these cops aren't prosecuted? So they're making the situation better for the cops because they believe that cops should be protected at all costs. And I've never understood that. I think that police should be held to a higher standard, not a lower one. And I guess that's why I'm not working with them. And they are, they're pouring gasoline on this fire every day.
What do you think is the motivation there? Is it to protect the status quo, protect the police? Is it that they're afraid that the police are going to not be responsive to them? Is it the culture? What do you think it is?
I think it's a combination of those things. I think that the main factor is the last one that you mentioned, or the second to last one you mentioned, that people would no longer respect the police as much if they know that they can manufacture some sort of situation when they're being arrested, when they're being detained, that would then get the cops in trouble, then they're going to do everything they can to try and replicate that. I think that is bullshit, but if the cops just acted to de-escalate situations instead of escalate them, then we would face far fewer of these. But that's not how cops behave. Cops behave, I have to arrest as many people as possible and charge as many people as possible all the time to stop crime. And that's not necessarily true. And, if we can change their minds, we could do something about this. And I don't see it happening.
Well, and to point out also
As
that
we all move
the
back into the
officer
world.
that had his knee on Floyd's neck had 18 previous complaints against him. Now, I don't know what the national average is, but that really does sound high. And if that's anywhere even near the national average,
Sure.
that's a concern. I mean, I'm not an expert enough to know, but 18 sounds awfully high to me.
Well, with numbers like that, like my concern would be that you're right. Like, I'm not sure what for that department is the average reported number of complaints. It's entirely like how many of those complaints were seen as containing merit, and how much disciplinary action was received because of that. Those are probably better numbers to go off of, because the amount of complaints filed, they could be frivolous, but who knows, what is the ratio between legit complaints that are filed against a police officer and ones that are done just for frivolous reasons.
Right no, and that's the other thing, which I understand. I don't necessarily agree with, but I understand why you wouldn't want a bunch of frivolous complaints against an officer affecting them professionally, right? If I'm just calling up every day and saying, oh, well, I want to lodge a formal complaint against, Officer Saka because his kids are too loud. And that gets put on Officer Saka's record, and then Officer Saka loses his job. That's unfair. And I agree with that. But, until we have...
outside to avoid that.
No, that's good. But, and that is the other issue, is how is that judged? What, is there an IG involved? Is there a DA involved? That exonerates. What is the level of the complaints? Is there different classifications for different kinds of complaints? And where's the evidence? And yada yada. Answers to questions we don't have, and we're not going to have it because the cops don't release that kind of information, and therefore you get situations like you have right now.
Yeah, I think. I'm sorry, I was just checking out. So it's the DA has, I guess, come out to and asked for patience, which admittedly is a fair ask, but the response to that is, well, how many years have they been waiting for the police department to clean up? At some point, the patience runs out. If they don't want people to run out of patience, they have to fix these things before they boil over, which it seems to me they have failed to do.
Well, the LA riots were what, 94, 97?
I think it was 94. Yes.
Yeah. So I mean, you've had some time here. We've been giving you plenty of patience, and things aren't changing; they're only getting worse.
But I mean, I brought this point up the other day when Nick and I were talking. The number of police officers in New York outnumbers the number of regular force personnel in the Canadian military. Like, if Canada was the amount, an invasion of New York, the police officers there would be sufficient enough to repel that attack, by just the sheer numbers game.
Yeah.
Okay? Right. Probably.
And so to think about that, within that institution, that there are that's a lot of people. And there are going to be bad cops out there, and I know that the idea is that that they should be within the police department. There should be that self-policing, is that there's an image to maintain That if there's somebody out there that is a bad cop who's got questionable practices, that it looks bad on the whole institution, and so they should take on the onus to weed those people out. But that being said, people aren't bad until they've reached their worst day. Okay, like so. Again, like let's even if all the complaints against this guy in the past were frivolous, that this cop, this worst state that he had, the day that he just didn't perform up to the standard, or obviously didn't perform to the standard that was expected from the public, and like sometimes there's no science leading to it, and so it's really hard to demonize the entire institution because of this, because the quality of police when it comes to that self-policing has gotten better, but probably just not at the speed that we expect, just because of the trust that we have in that institution.
Yeah, and the truth of the matter is that even if the self-policing has gotten better, we're still seeing issues where more minorities are getting arrested and prosecuted than other ethnicities and then in other neighborhoods. And so there's still a systemic problem. We have evidence of it. And why hasn't that been fixed? And until it is, and listen, I am fully aware that it's not all on the cops, right? There are economic issues, there are educational issues that are systemic that cause poorer people to get arrested more often and cause more crimes and be prosecuted more unfairly than other ethnicities and other financial brackets, however you want to say that. So I understand that it's not all on the cops, but it's been going on for so long that the people are just tired of it, and the cops are the ones doing the arresting, doing the charging, so they're the first ones to blame.
At a minimum, they're at the front lines and have the highest consequences if something goes wrong. In most cases,
yes.
Yeah, there's a big problem, I think, is the lack of representation from these communities in police departments. Mm-hmm. Just because there's a culture of that, when you're growing up in a culture where you don't have trust for law enforcement, that it's really hard to see people from those communities go out and become police officers.
Yep, absolutely. And how difficult is it for those authorities to accept people from those neighborhoods, or to do what needs to be done to make sure that those communities are included? And if they're not willing to take those steps, then those communities are just going to be forgotten forever.
Well, and so let me, I do want to move on because we've got 3 topics, so I want to move on to the other one, but I got one more question before we do, because this was a very good question in the live chat that I think we could dedicate an entire show to this, but I do want to see what your guys' thoughts on this. Kimo Maki says, quote, running out of patience seldom improves things. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I don't want to say anything.
That was going to be loaded. That was going to be loaded. I know.
I don't want to say anything that could be construed as inciting violence. So I'll just say, as Thomas Jefferson once said, the tree of liberty must be refreshed from time to time with the blood of patriots and tyrants.
Okay, so Ethan goes straight to Revolutionary War. Saka, what's your view?
I mean, there's my view is weird. That there needs to be that acknowledgement of that systemic problem, and that the remedies are done, because you don't see let's be honest. This is sadly a very American phenomenon. A few years back, the city that I live, the city that I live in Canada, was talking about increasing the police department budget to deal with the growing amount of murders that we had that year, because we shot from 2 to 4. Let that sink in for a second.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like when Justin Trudeau banned assault weapons after one shooting. We don't respond to things in in the right way, and we haven't for decades, and it's catching up with us.
I'm going to give my opinion on this, which is I think the way that was phrased, running out of patience seldom improves things. I think it depends on how you define running out of patience. Dr. Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. was asked to be patient, and in a letter from a Birmingham jail, he said, you have to stop being patient, because justice too long delayed is justice denied. Now, he didn't run out of patience in the sense that he didn't advocate violence. He didn't advocate for rioting or doing anything like that. But he in his view, had run out of patience, and that was an important thing. So if you define running out of patience as going out and committing violence, for the most part, I think I would strongly agree that running out of patience seldom accomplishes anything. On the flip side, I think it depends on how you have to run out of patience. You have to stand up and say, I'm going to do something about it,
Right.
whatever that is. And if you don't, these things keep happening. And so people do need to run out of patience. Burning down buildings, destroying property, and killing people, I don't think is the answer. But there has to be a limit to patience, or else this never stops, in my view.
Right.
But all right, so the another very interesting. So we're going to keep an eye on it, but I think we're in agreement. I think we're all sort of concerned that this is clearly this started in one city and has started to spread and is now in the cities you'd expect. And hopefully it's not going to spread further, but it is concerning, and so we'll keep an eye on it, and we will do breaking news if it warrants it. So meanwhile, the Donald Trump has signed an executive order which appears to be aimed at drastically curtailing the activities of social media, and yeah, this is just going to be one of those days. And it is an executive order, so it is not a law, but it is an instruction that is handed down from the executive branch as to how laws are supposed to be enforced in this country. And what he has said is he's asked the FCC, which regulates social media, to reconsider how they have been viewing previous legislation, and that the protections on free speech should be viewed differently in a way that would honestly, it seems to, well, I don't think it's probably possible is the way he's asking for it, and I think that's kind of the point of why he's asking that way. But would either of the two of you like to explain what this executive order says a bit more, and what you think the implications of it are?
Yeah, sure. I'm inside now. Sorry, at the kids' screen. So, and actually, I'm probably not going to hold my camera because it's uncomfortable, but that's cool. So. Back in like the early days of the internet, in '96 they passed a Communication Act in the States. It basically said that looked at, well, what are we going to do for kind of people posting on forums, people putting information on websites, and like what can we do to kind of protect people there. So, for example, if I had a blog post, like I created my own GeoCities page or something, and somebody came along and started putting hate speech on my page, started posting on the forums there. Me as the publisher of that page, would I be held responsible for that? Would GeoCities be held responsible for the stuff that the content that people put on there? And it basically created a protection for the publishers of these websites, or that they would not be held accountable to the speech acts of the people that post on their page. Now, this is back in '96. This is back before the idea that there would be these social media outlets that would consume, to be, being used by hundreds of millions of people to communicate. But the law does protect them in the same way. When Alex Jones got kicked off of YouTube a few years back, I remember having this discussion, and it was about whether or not Twitter and YouTube have become like de facto public squares of speech, and whether or not they kicking people off this platform was a good thing to do, or whether or not the government should intervene and turn these places into public squares. Now, that's incredibly hard to do. Like the government can't come in and say, "Hey, listen, even though that you're a private corporation, we want you to, grant free speech on your platform." They can't tell them how to do business that way. But what Trump has done instead has taken a look at that law there and to ask whether or not the publishers are actually entitled to this protection. Basically saying that if a social media outlet like Twitter or YouTube comes along and they start policing their own content, but they're policing it in such a way that can be seen as biased, whether it's left-leaning or right-leaning, or favoring a certain demographic over another.
So any kind of selective policing in any way.
Right.
Yeah, any type of selective policing. That act alone of that selective policing of the content that they provide is them exercising their speech in what content is that they're providing. So that they become less of a publisher of content there, but their editorials or their editorialization, if that's a word, of the content makes them just as culpable in the speech that's on their platform as the person who does write it, because they are endorsing those views now. And so what this legislation, or what this order is trying to do is to take a look at whether or not companies that do this selective policing should be entitled to that protection. Now, if the FCC did come back and say that, by doing this selective policing, you are now becoming culpable in the speech of the people that you are on the platform that you're hosting for, well, that protection's gone. And which means that for every single post on Twitter, every single video on YouTube, every single thing that gets forward through your site, if there was something that was illegal, whether it was hate speech or an incitement to violence of some sort, and it got through the cracks, that them as the publisher of that content would be just, if a lawsuit was to come up, that those publishers, those corporations would become litigants in any type of lawsuit that would be brought against the person who produced the content.
And you had that situation a couple of years ago with Craigslist, and I forget what the other one was. What was the other website? Anyway, where the feds came in and shut down their personal ads because there was a lot of human trafficking going on. And I think what you're seeing the beginning of...
was it Craigslist, are you thinking? Or
no, there was two of them. It was Craigslist, another one. I just can't remember what the other one is called. What you're seeing is the beginning of legislation finally starting to catch up with technology. I don't know if social media should be protected or isn't protected. I go back and forth every couple of months. I feel one way or the other. Currently, I feel that they aren't, but then someone's going to tell me something. Backpage, Native Atheist, thank you, Backpage. That was the other one. In a couple of months, someone's going to say something like, oh, yeah, you're right. You're totally right. So I cannot be trusted with any opinion on this. What I do know is I hate this type of selective enforcement by the Office of the Executive. Also, there's these things called signing statements, which I don't like, which a president can sign when a law is passed. And instead of vetoing it, the president just says, well, here's how I read the law. So here's how I'm directing the offices of the executive to enforce them. I've never liked signing statements. I think they're unconstitutional. Anyway, my point is Trump's obviously doing this because he wants Twitter to get sued. He can't sue Twitter himself, but if he can manufacture some sort of situation where somebody else can sue Twitter, he can then go, I got you, dicks.
Well, because there's... Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, and I don't think this is going to hold up in court. I don't think that it's legally viable, and I think it's going to last. But go ahead.
Well, so yeah, because there's two kind of... Let's assume for a second that somehow the FCC comes back and what Trump is asking for is saying that the spirit of the law, as written in '96, was that every single publisher out there be good faith actors in policing their content equally across all groups, that they wouldn't be selective about any of the policing, that the spirit of the law only applied to them if they were going to be doing this amicably to everybody. And, well, that's obviously not the case. I mean, regardless of what your points are, most social media outlets are are not completely equal, like in the way that they police content.
No, it's, Reddit tends to be more left leaning. Facebook tends to be more right leaning. I mean, yeah, they're all over the place.
Yeah. So, so let's say that this managed to that the FCC comes back and says, okay, you know what, there's a point to this, and that yes, it should only apply to good faith actors that are policing everything equally. Well, this becomes now a problem because, like, first off, is that like you said, this isn't about fact checking Trump's tweets. This isn't going to solve that.
Right.
When I say that this is a spiteful order, where you say it's kind of like it's done out of spite, it's because of that idea of litigation. Is that you take away the protections of these sites, you can get them into these websites to have potentially thousands of lawsuits against them. Imagine something like YouTube, for example, is that every single video that goes out there feels is slanderous or defamatory to their character. And
right.
we can think of people within our that would probably have objections to some of this stuff, some of that stuff.
One or two.
I can't think of anyone. It's just going over my head. I'm sorry. Please continue.
Those in those situations, there is that if they were to push litigation against somebody for what they've said online, that they could bring YouTube in as a litigant on that as well for being a publisher of that content. And right now, like, a lot of people don't take this stuff seriously online because, well, what are you going to get from some anonymous person on the other side of the internet? But when the temptation of a multi-million-dollar corporation as a potential litigant inside these things is there, well, all of a sudden now, I think I'm using the term litigant incorrectly now, but that's okay. But when that temptation is there, you might start seeing potentially thousands of lawsuits that could pop up. Right. So the way to avoid that would be to either force these corporations to do extreme policing of their content, like manually checking every single comment, every single video, every single 35-second video of your cat clawing on the sofa or whatever videos people put on YouTube would have to be like they would be very careful about the content that's out there. So they'd have to have that extended staff they'd have to invest in that extended staff to make sure that all the content out there is stuff that they approve of. But if they decide that we're just not going to selective police anymore, well, then the other option is it just turns into the Wild West. They're not going to ban people as much. Anything short of something that could also be brought to court as a federal crime, like inciting of violence, would probably be accepted on those platforms. So those are the two options.
Right. And something like YouTube, YouTube monetizes our videos based upon what advertisers want to support. For instance, I did a stream last night, which you can go watch if you want. I'm not going to talk about the content. Twitter, listen to me. YouTube limited the monetization on it because of the content. And I knew that going in. I'm not angry about it or anything. But what YouTube tells us is, hey, your content's fine, but we know that McDonald's isn't going to want to advertise on my stream from last night. I get it, 100%. It's a very controversial topic, and YouTube lives or dies by their advertisers. So if YouTube now has to let everyone and anyone say anything that they want to, advertisers are going to say, well, I can't trust that. Like, how is YouTube going to monetize this anymore? They won't be able to. This is, like most things this man does, an absolute disaster in the making. Well, and go ahead.
Oh, well, no, and it could backfire because one of the things was that they may be forced to. The other argument that was made was that they could be forced to not permit certain content, for example, things that they know are factually inaccurate, to be published. And what started this was Trump saying things that were not factually accurate.
Right.
And Twitter decided to tag or to put in links to the fact check articles refuting every claim he made, which I'm thrilled that they did. But
sure.
Obviously it's maybe a little too little too late. But nonetheless, he hasn't thought this through, which is rather staggering. But well, it's I shouldn't say that because it's really to be expected at this point. But it could backfire on him, and whether it does or doesn't, I think you're right. There's a lot of unintended potential consequences across all social media, which is why if it does go to court, I would think we would see the same thing as happened with the Pentagon Papers, which is where the New York Times released secret documents from the Pentagon, which said that they had known for quite some time that the Vietnam War could not be won. They were actually, their studies said we should get out, and several presidential administrations said, well, we'll leave it to someone else. So they stayed, losing American lives, knowing full well we couldn't win the war. When they published this, it was considered a American secret. Their argument was, yeah, it is a secret. It is a secret. It is absolutely a government secret, but it's one that the people were entitled to know, and we can and should publish. They were sued, and even their own competitors joined in amicus in defense of that suit because they said, no, this is an assault on the entire industry. And I think that's where Trump is now. And my hope is that they start to push back in some seriously meaningful way because, this Twitter thing was just a shot across the bow by saying, okay, we're going to link to his. He's being petulant. He's being a petulant child. That's all this is.
Yep. Yeah, he's crying and whining for attention, and he prefers negative attention. And this has gotten him plenty of negative attention, and he gets to read it while sitting in his spray tan machine.
Yeah, well, yeah. I'm glad you said machine. If you had said because it's something industrial has to be applying that stuff. That's not just you can't get that in a spray bottle.
No.
All right. Well, so I think so. The over under on this is was I understanding you correctly, Ethan, and that you think basically nothing is actually going to come of this. This is going to either the FCC isn't going to move forward with it, or they'll pay lip service, but they won't actually change anything. Or what are your completely unfair on the spot? There's only all of social media watching you in this prediction that will get played back time and time again in perpetuity if you've gotten it wrong. That was worth it for the look. It was worth it for the look.
Hi, grandkids, go to bed.
Okay.
I don't. I think that if you tried to actually bring a case into a court of law, I think that the judge would just refer to the act as written in 96 and say that's how the act is written. I don't see the executive having enough power. You'd need to push some new legislation through the Congress. I don't.
Saka, any thoughts? Yep.
Yeah, it's going to come down. I'm interested to see what happens now from in response to this, because if they do offer a clarification of this that does that uses any of the language that Trump did about the good faith actors, it's going to go to court. Somebody's going to take it to court.
Yep.
And probably one of those things that gets appealed right up to the Supreme Court, which is probably the worst case scenario, because obviously the Supreme Court is kind of leaning towards one direction right now.
Yeah, a little bit.
Which could open the floodgates to this being potentially a bad thing. Now, if the FCC comes back and doesn't offer a clarification, or straight up says this just applies to all publishers of content, doesn't matter what they do, then it's dead in the water. But there's going to be some type of expectation, some type of response from them now on this before it goes forward, before anybody tries to challenge it.
And we have a very good point from But. That's the one downside of working on it. Is some of the names you have to say. But okay, But has made an excellent point, which is that basically it's an executive order, so he'll be forced to say, "Looky here, this is what I signed," which I think is sort of I think he's very proud of himself, and. Yeah. So,
Tony Design says, "I signed an executive order making ice cream sundae sandwiches. Tell Saka."
We did, by the way.
Desserts are not sandwiches.
Cereal is soup. Go ahead, Nick.
All right. Well, so and I do want to quickly kick back. I'll kick back to the riots thing in just 1 minute because there was something new, interesting that came up on that. But just for a few minutes, I don't think there's any. We've talked about this ad nauseum, and now it's a waiting game until the numbers start to change dramatically. But I think they're going to. So just sort of predictions from people here. What do they think we're looking at? Are we looking at, for example, a some form of second lockdown when things start to get really bad? Are they going to get that bad? Are we going to see that happening soon? Is it going to be now? The CDC has said, which surprised the living daylights out of me, they said that they don't think there's going to be a second spike, and a spike is as opposed to a wave, and that's an important distinction. But
Sure.
they said they didn't think we'd see that actually until autumn. And the reason being that you're going to start to see, as the temperature gets colder, a spike in regular flu cases, and then that in conjunction with the COVID. That strikes me as almost out of touch with reality, which I don't like to say about the CDC because I've been a huge fan of theirs up until now.
Yeah.
But everything that I'm seeing suggests that over the next two weeks, we're going to start to see a huge spike in numbers. It's going to go up in the same pattern, which is exponential on the 3-day. Doubling every 3 days, possibly better because social distancing will have an impact, but only to slow it down. So what are the thoughts of each of you guys?
Saka, you go first.
I think that the spike that we're seeing right now, part of it could be credited to the Memorial Day, like last week for you guys, just because of the timeline kind of fits with that. We're starting to see a little bit of spike. That could just be a reaction from that. As for there not being any more spikes, but just waves, it's all going to come down to what people choose to do. The U.S. system is extremely flawed, unfortunately, compared to other parts of the world, just because of the way that they've been approaching this. The emphasis on personal liberties and freedoms that gets espoused by so many Americans is going to be their downfall really when it comes to this, because people don't like being told what to do, and that combined with a social safety net that does not catch all the people that are losing the quality of life because of being on lockdown. I guess maybe. By saying that there's not going to be another spike, I could believe that only in the context that it's just going to be a steady growth until a vaccine happens. Like that seems to be like the ups and downs. There's going to be a lot less downs that come from this as more and more people are going to feel the pressure of this in the long run.
The historian Shelby Foote, who specialized in talking about the Civil War, he once said that he thought that the reason the Civil War happened was because Americans were unable to do the thing that they're actually best at, which is compromise. And I think we've gotten to another point in history where we've forgotten how to compromise. And it is literally it literally has killed people and will kill a lot more. And I couldn't agree with you more. Our need for freedom and our need to demonstrate our freedom at all times and at all places and in every way we freaking want to will be our downfall. I agree.
Are you suggesting that freedom fries was somehow a bad idea?
Oh my God.
I like that I just know how to trigger them. It's worth it. It's well worth it.
I literally ate French fries every day for a week in college just to piss off one of my conservative friends. That is a true story. I would walk by his table in the cafeteria with my fries and I would eat them and just stare at him as I walked.
That was one of the funniest things out there with people changing the names of French fries to freedom fries.
It wasn't people; it was the U.S. Congress. It was
U.S. Congress. U.S. Congress, and it's just like trying to explain to people. It's like, well, no, it's not because it's from France. It's a style of cut. It's a French cut. Like,
yes.
Oh, never mind.
Yeah.
Freedom fries. Let's go.
They got mad about a black guy in a tan suit. Okay.
Yeah,
Remember
yeah.
that.
Well, and then just well, oh, Jesus. Well, the claims then too, which is of course France has never done anything for us. They've never really been allies in our heart. I was just like, I was like, oh, wow. Fifth grade history can correct you. Actually,
Well, there was
it's
the
the U.S.
one
That's like,
time,
yeah,
okay?
yeah, I suppose. Well, and they gave us the Statue of Liberty, but she turned green. I mean, come
She
on.
did.
she
She
was
did.
she was gold, and then it was
How
obviously
did they miss
defective.
that
It
one? Right.
was, yeah. All right. Well, and then so before we go, there is one interesting development, and so I was hoping, Ethan, you could fill us in on the development on the
Sure.
riots. Yeah.
Yeah, so Amy Klobuchar, who of course was running for president and is a one of the top 3, I think, VP candidates, something like that.
I think right now she's considered the number one VP. She's being vetted for it, which they usually do vet the top 4 or 5. But my understanding is she is currently the top Biden pick for VP.
Right. And by the way, I want to note that months ago I told everybody that Klobuchar was the backup. No, and everyone thought that I was nuts. And I said the establishment loves her. If it's not Biden, it'll be Klobuchar. And people thought I was crazy. Anyway, Klobuchar is now, of course,
yeah, people thought you were crazy, but that's not why. But at any rate,
well,
please continue.
Klobuchar is the current one of the current senators from Minnesota. I believe she's the senior senator. That I'm not sure of. But back in 2006, Amy Klobuchar was a district attorney. And she was a district attorney who declined to bring charges against Derek Chauvin. Derek Chauvin is the cop who kept his neck on George Floyd's, or kept his knee on George Floyd's neck for this is 19 minutes. I'm not sure.
That's what I said 8 minutes, and then he stopped, and then 11 minutes.
Oh, okay. So this is 19 minutes is what this
is. 8 and 11 is. I'm sorry, I'm being snarky. Please.
It's okay. It's all right. So apparently at one point she had the opportunity to charge him with a crime and she didn't. And the establishment's going to protect her. I don't think her job's in danger. But that when people like me are ranting and raving and we're talking about systemic institutionalized racism and systemic institutionalized problems with protecting police, this is what we're talking about. We need to know exactly, and I mean exactly, why charges were not brought against this man in 2006.
Well, this was, if I recall, this was for the charges for murder of a Native American. Also,
yes.
I think it was in the line of duty as well. So this, as I understand it, this would be now.
This doesn't say.
Okay, so ostensibly this is the second person to have died in his custody.
Right.
Now, Klobuchar.
That we do know.
Yeah, Klobuchar had gotten into some trouble, and this had come up during the debates, come up during the primaries, that she had declined some cases that were thought to be political suicide, but nonetheless should have been prosecuted. At least that was the narrative that was framed. I don't know if it's true or not. I remember that, and this was one of them, was the Native American who had been killed by a police officer. And here is the same police officer now, a number of years later, having killed a black man by putting his knee on his neck for an extended period of time. So, is that,
and it's like, you don't, like, it's not Hollywood. This isn't Hollywood. Like, if you're a cop and you've killed more than one person, like, there's a problem. Like, I'm just saying, that the shootouts with 20 bad guys doesn't really happen too often.
If you're a cop and you've killed one person, there's probably a problem. Not in the U.S., but in every other industrialized country, if you're a police officer who's killed one person, that's thought to be a very good sign that something's wrong. I mean,
if you're a person who has killed a person,
I think, okay, fine. If you want to just one-upsmanship of ethical gamesmanship here, sure, fine. But where's that mute button? Okay. So no, okay, that's okay. You win. He wins that round. Yeah, I think. Is this going to affect her chances?
Yeah. Honestly, I think that if Tom himself got to pick the VP, it would be Klobuchar. There's a lot of former Hillary staffers that now work at the DNC who really want Elizabeth Warren, because they think that she's someone they can control. And there is waning support among the establishment for Kamala Harris, but apparently Biden himself prefers Harris, and that's just what someone told me. So take that with a grain of salt. There's been a push for Stacey Abrams. She doesn't want to work with Biden because she doesn't like his history of segregationist rhetoric. And she feels it would hurt her own chances in her own political future if Biden doesn't win. So, I don't know who the pick is going to be. I know that those are the main four, and I know that Governor Gretchen, oh my God, Whittam, thank you, really, really wants the spot, but she's not popular with some of the people at the establishment because she's sparred with them over stuff over the years. It will be a woman. I can guarantee you that whoever it's going to be is going to be a woman. And Klobuchar, no, this isn't going to affect the people at the establishment that like Klobuchar. Don't care about this.
Saka?
I mean, yeah, it's I know it's I say this half jokingly, but with the current just circus that is the Democratic Party in the U.S., that's they missed their opportunity to run Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson and the cutest puppy you've ever seen for his VP.
It's true,
because that one probably had a chance of winning.
Yeah,
just saying.
That was the only one I remember that Bill Maher had made that argument. And I really liked it, but this was wow, got to be at least 12 years ago, more than that. You can do the math and figure it out, but it was when right after Bill Clinton, his second term, and a lot of people still liked him and wanted him to run for a third term, but of course he couldn't. And a lot of people really liked Arnold Schwarzenegger, but he couldn't run. And so I was like, look, the two parties, they can't each run the only candidate they want to. The Dems really want to run Clinton for a third term. They can't do it. And the Republicans really want to run Arnold Schwarzenegger, and they can't do it. It's like, why not just let them run whoever the fuck they want to run it? Who cares? Like, that was actually a really good. I'd like to see that, but Arnold Schwarzenegger versus Clinton.
God, actually, I would like to see that. Wow.
That would, well, I'd like to see just about. I mean, I'd like to watch paint dry over this one. Not that this is boring, but this is.
It's painful. It's going to be so. It's a 76-year-old man, no, a 77-year-old man, and a 74-year-old man yelling into the wind. I mean, it's going to be, two old white rich dudes yelling about stuff. It's going to be exceedingly, exceedingly boring.
In other words, nothing's really changed since the founding fathers, which was, I think that was the point that Landon Nolan made earlier too, which is everyone thinks that America was created democratically. It was not. The vast majority of people here on this continent wanted to stay part of England. The vast majority. Yeah. It was a small minority that basically got the whole thing done, and it was a bunch of rich white people who didn't want to pay taxes. Wow. That's
well, one of the major reasons that George Washington wanted to take over the commander-in-chief position was he kept ordering shirts from England, and they kept getting the measurements wrong. And there's this really nasty for him, of course. He was all gentleman all the time. But there's this nasty note from him where he's like, I told you, the links that I wanted, the cuffs and the links of the lapels, and you got literally everything wrong. And he's drawing the shirt, and he's got like arrows pointed to all the different places where the guy messed up. And it was one of the major reasons why he was mad at England, was that he couldn't get shirts that fit. True story.
Congratulations.
Well, I mean, I just I do agree with Nick, is that from me and the rest of the Commonwealth to our treasonous colonialists down south. You probably would have been better off with us. Just saying.
Oh, I've made the argument for a long time that if we had just stayed in the British Empire, things would be far better for probably the entire world. I truly believe that.
We'll have to have that discussion at some point. That's a worthwhile discussion. All right.
Sure.
Well, thank you all for joining us. we will be having. I mean, if the riots start to get very big, we will of course revisit that. But otherwise, next week we will have our Patreon hangout, and so Patreons of In Time, and you can become a patron at any time. The link is in the description. But come join us and hang out and chat. It's also where we get a lot of ideas for shows, and we really appreciate our Patreon support. So I hope you guys will consider doing that. Otherwise, we'll also have on Dr. Richard Carrier coming up to discuss the influence of Christianity on early science. And I think, gosh, I get the sneaking suspicion we're going to have a little more news, and there's the stash trying to compete with Jim Majors, but I'm sorry, Saka. It's a great stash, but Jim is still.
It's a great stash, though, man.
It is.
Really
he hung up. Okay. So, all right. I shouldn't have gone there. All right, but I'd like to thank Ethan for joining us. I'd like to also thank Saka for joining us, and thank you guys for watching, and look forward to seeing you guys soon.
Have a great night, everybody.